Greetings, dear viewers, ladies and gentlemen. This is Addis Dialogue. In this edition, we'll be talking about Africa's biodiversity, ecology, and the challenges associated with climate change, and what exactly is being done in order to avert the issues. In search of answers to this, I am joined by Professor Mekuria Argaw. He is Professor of Environmental Ecology. He's also lecturer at the Addis Ababa University Center for Environmental Science, and he is also the Executive Director of Horn of Africa Regional Environmental Center and Network. And as a lecturer, he has produced a number of scholars in the areas. He has also conducted different researches in the area. With the program, I'm Shifara Alaiko. Do stay with us. Professor, thank you so much for making the time to talk to us.
Thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure for me to be here in the new premise of ABC. I'm glad to talk to you on this topic today.
So let's start our discussion with Ethiopia vis-a-vis its biodiversity. From the researches, from the studies that you've conducted, is Ethiopia's biodiversity making progress? And if so, what are some of the enabling factors and conditions?
Thank you so much for this question. It's not a simple yes or no answer for this. You can answer it in a number of different ways, different dimensions. When it comes to Ethiopian biodiversity, it's quite obvious to many of us Ethiopians and Africans and people in this profession in the world. Ethiopia is one of the mega diversity countries, as you know, in terms of its plants and animals or faunal diversity. At the same time, microbial organisms diversity also. So, as one of these mega diversity countries, we have been doing a lot in conserving our biodiversity resources and also making use of these resources for changing people's livelihood and making progress in our economic development. So, as you know, much of our economic progress really comes from the natural resource sector, particularly agriculture and name it. So in that regard, we have been doing as a nation lots of interventions, actions by preparing programs, national programs, policies, and also Ethiopia is always at the forefront in accepting and also signing the global conventions, commitments, starting from the CBD, name it, all those. So in that regard, Ethiopia has been making a lot of progress in getting its biodiversity resource and important ecosystems conserved. And from early on, we have been doing this through the establishment of protected areas, national parks, sanctuaries, and nature reserves, name it as well. So again, we can say we have done a commendable job in this regard. So significant proportion of our natural ecosystem has been put under protection already. And again, when it comes to conserving biodiversity has so many dimensions, particularly three major dimensions: the genetic, the species, and the habitat or ecosystem level diversity. So we are blessed with all these types of diversity. So when it comes to the genetic conservation aspect, as you all know, Ethiopia has also made a significant progress in putting its genetic resources through the establishment of mechanisms called in situ and ex situ conservation systems. When it comes to the ex situ conservation aspect of it, I think we have already preserved significant number of accessions, particularly plants, in our national gene bank. So that is another good progress that we can mention of as a country. And well, again, now I come to the yes, these are all the yes parts, but if I mention to the few examples of the no parts, ex situ conservation, apart from the protected areas and nature reserves, so those I mentioned, we still have to do a lot in terms of having these resources protected in the right way and also making them serve society, community through the generation of biodiversity-related livelihood sources, income sources for local communities as well as for contributing to the national economy. I think in that regard we have a lot to do ahead. I cannot really dare to say we have made significant progress in that regard. But all in all, when you look at, for instance, the typical measuring yardstick, at least for the last 2 decades, is how far countries have made progress in achieving those global IKI targets. If you remember the Nagoya Protocol, the IKI target, all nations had to commit themselves to a number of about 22 targets. So in that regard, have we made progress, particularly in the so-called biodiversity decade, the time between the period between 2011 to 2020? Well, not necessarily only to Ethiopia, but if you take countries at the global level, it's not encouraging. The progress we have made is not encouraging. If I mention one particular example, for instance, one of the targets was to put at least 17% of the country's natural ecosystems under protection or under protected areas. Have we done that? I'm not sure about the numbers, but if I compare the number of protected areas, national parks we had a decade ago, today they are quite a lot, or the numbers have increased. Yeah, we have put some more number of areas into this protected area category. In that regard, okay, we have made some progress, but really, did we meet that 17%? I doubt. Yeah, also same with the other targets. I cannot represent the institutions who have been analyzing and reporting about this progress, but at least from what I read and from what I understand, I think the IKI targets were not really successfully met by many countries, including ours. But there were positive progresses, there were some achievements, but not as expected as it should be. Therefore, coming back to the yes/no answer, yes, partly we have made progress as a nation, but no, also we have not done really much as we had to do. So there is a lot to go far beyond what we have done so far.
Yes. Let's bring this up to a wider context, to African context, and let's also talk about biodiversity when it comes to the continent of Africa. So how vulnerable is biodiversity on the continent of Africa, especially when compared to that of other nations? And how is Ethiopia helping, in the fight against climate change, issues of biodiversity and ecology?
Thank you so much. Yes, I think it's quite also logical to consider it or to look at it at the African continent level. Well, again, compared to other continents, Africa is also one of the blessed continents in terms of this biodiversity. Take the Congo Basin, the Zambezi Basin, all those prestigious natural ecosystems, including ours in the Eastern Africa region and West Africa, Cameroon, for instance. These are exemplary areas where we have richest type of biodiversity in the continent. All others in the Southern African region as well. So, yes, Africa is compared to other global regions is more vulnerable to climate change impacts in terms of the impact on biodiversity. The evidences the assessments, for instance, I hope you know the EPS, Science and Policy Platform for Biodiversity and Ecosystems. They have made global and sub-regional assessments on the state and trend of biodiversity. So the African Assessment Report result shows there is a continuous rise in the number of species that are getting closer to the edge of extinction, and some have already extinct. The number of species that have extinct from the continent has been increasing, starting from the 16th century, 1500. The result shows since then, under different categories of this taxa, there have been a number of species already recorded as extinct from the continent. So that simply reveals, yes, we are losing a lot of our biodiversity resources in the continent. And what are the factors that makes Africa most significantly vulnerable compared to others? Obviously, the economic level. You know, taking care of nature requires a lot of investment, you see? And at the same time, the population of Africa is increasing, growing. What does that mean? That means there is an increasing need for food, for water, and for medicine, name it. All other resources that we need, goods and services that we need from these ecosystems, comes from nature. So, yeah, you are exploiting nature, you are using nature, but at the same time you are investing very little in preserving it, in conserving it. Why? Because we have very limited resources. The limited resources goes to the other sectors, like the government's priority is feeding its own people. Okay, taking care of its people in terms of health, in terms of education, putting up infrastructure. When you really allocate the money into these sectors and also at the same time try to put money into nature's conservation, the African governments find their position very, very difficult in assigning sufficient amount of resource. So the point is, yes, we are vulnerable because we are not investing much because of limited capacity. And at the same time, we also have to develop our economy by drawing resources from nature. Mining, for instance. When you mine, you are destroying ecosystems. Okay? If you limit your mining and shift the economy to some other sectors, then you are also contributing towards saving your ecosystem, your biodiversity. Okay? So there are these paradoxes. The other side of the problem is debt. African countries are systematically indebted. Okay? So they had to service their debt. So what does that mean? Whatever you generate from your economy goes to debt service. Okay? So this is another bottleneck. That's why our biodiversity in the continent is in the continuous trajectory of decline. All right? And yeah, this is based on the figures. I can take the particular example from Ethiopia. Just 2022, I was one of the contributing experts in the National Ecosystem and Biodiversity Assessment. The trend, the status and trend of the different ecosystems of the country, where are they in the last 3-4 decades? What do the figures show? What does the trend tell us in terms of all forms of biodiversity? So the results of those studies are good indicators, reflects the situation in other African countries as well. So the trajectories are really indicating progressive decline. Wow. Okay, so this is not without reason. The reasons are being those I mentioned. Yeah. So yeah, we are vulnerable. We are very much limited by resources in putting up into nature conservation, protection of nature. Yeah, and also capacity as well. The other side of the bottleneck is limited capacity in terms of expertise, in terms of manpower. Luckily, we Ethiopians do have very good number of experts, specialists who have been really trained since long, and yeah, we have compared to other countries in terms of capacity, better. We are in a better position. But other countries, take neighboring countries like small countries, I don't have to mention by name, but at least those countries I'm working with at the Horn of Africa level, I know where the capacity is in terms of human power, trained human power. So that has also a contribution in putting up like mainstreaming biodiversity into development programs, national policies. That requires expertise knowledge. That requires data, that requires information. So all these are limitations. So those factors together, put together, do contribute to the decline in biodiversity and also aggravate the impact of climate change in the continent.
Professor, thank you so much for that wonderful idea. Again, let's turn our discussion to COP28, which is taking place in the UAE, bringing together thousands of experts, climate experts and others. From that point of view, Professor, what concrete results should we expect, especially when it comes to the fight against climate change and also to beefing up or to reinforcing the biodiversity of African nations?
Again, these two global problems are really inseparable, the biodiversity issue and climate change. They are interwoven, okay? As long as you are not able to curb the impact of climate change or the problem of climate change, you cannot really be able to address the declining trend of biodiversity, because the simple reason I can give you is the climate changes, meaning temperature changes, meaning availability of water changes. Yeah, what does that mean? That means the two most important factors in determining the distribution of the survival of a species, okay, moisture and temperature, in places of those naturally ecologically defined zones do change. What does that mean? Let's say the temperature in the soil is changed. So in that changed temperature, those microorganisms that used to survive in those temperature range will not be able to survive anymore, which means either they have to vanish or they have to migrate or adapt to a different ecozone. Okay? So if you address climate change and if you manage to limit, like the countries have agreed in Paris, at least to limit the rise of the global surface temperature compared to the industrial period, at least by 2 degrees centigrade, or if possible to put the maximum effort to limit the rise to only 1.5 degrees centigrade. Okay? If we as global communities can be able to maintain this and achieve this, which means we are currently. Do you see the relationship? Yeah, the temperature, the global temperature has been rising continuously, progressively, but we need to curb that progress. Okay, we need to bend the curve. Okay, same with the global biodiversity. It has been since, as I said, since the 16th century, at least since people have started to trace back using techniques to study the extinction of species. So the curve shows you a continuous decline. Okay? So what does that mean? If we have to really achieve these two global goals, then this curve has to be bended, you know? This has to start increasing, okay? Decline in a species, in ecosystem degradation, has to stop somewhere, so that by the efforts you put into that, yeah, by the conservation practices or actions you take, you will start to improve or reinstate, restore the biodiversity resources that have been lost, or those which are already coming into that ecosystem as new pioneers, invaders, or new residents. Then that has to really increase the curve of the biodiversity. So coming back to the COP28, you see, it's a continuation of the Paris Agreement. Countries have committed themselves in Paris to these 2 levels of temperature increase. So what should countries do? What does that pledge mean? Each and every country has a responsibility to adjust its national program, its national policies towards low carbon emission development pathway. So what does that mean? That means countries are required to commit themselves to at least reduce the level of emission at their national level by a certain percentage that they will be willingly able to reduce until 2030, so that this zero emission target by 2050 can be reached. So the NDCs, countries have prepared the nationally determined commitments. So let me take again the example of Ethiopia. There are now these 2 issues. I'm coming to trying to link it with COP28. So there was this promise. Each country has, or the so-called developed and developing countries do have differentiated responsibilities. Developed countries, being economically in a better position, they do have finance, they do have money. So the whole negotiation is all about how much money is needed and how willing these countries are to put some of their resources into this, so that developing countries can also invest. I'm taking you back to the discussion we had, the issue of debt, the issue of putting some resources of those countries into the prevention of climate change. Okay? Countries have to develop climate change strategies, and their development programs should be twinned towards low carbon emission, which means climate change has to be mainstreamed in all sectoral programs, actions, so that emission can be reduced and also carbon capture can be maximized. So coming back to the Ethiopian case, Ethiopia has put, now all countries have revised, I think, their NDCs 2 years ago. So in those NDCs, countries have put their commitments. Okay, I will reduce the proportion of emission from my country by this much level. Ethiopia has committed itself 68% of the emission will be reduced by 2030. So that's an ambitious target, big target. Okay, so now coming back to COP, the main issue at COP28 is discussing, they call it global stock take. Where are we now in terms of progress after the Paris Agreement? Okay, it has been already how many years? 8 years already? Yeah, something like that. So what have we done as countries? Okay, as global communities, what have you achieved so far? They will assess this. Of course, there are a number of issues. You know, this is a gathering of all the global communities from different walks of life and organizations in the world, from the private to the UN organizations. So they are in one room discussing the global issue. So what have we done so far? And where do we go from here? And what should we do? I think, as I have read it from the outcome of the first day negotiation discussion, I think this pledge for finance has already been agreed. The countries have already agreed to put aside about 100 billion USD for addressing climate change impact. Particularly, the loss and damage agreement has already been reached before, but what was missing is availability of finance. Therefore, now they have, even 2 countries have already started, as I followed it from the news. Qatar and Germany have already put into the coffer, which means it is a good start. So this pledge of 100 billion USD has been there year after year, but so far no money has been really generated, and finance has not been flowing to the needy. But now countries will be able to generate, get this fund for the losses and the damage that they will be receiving or affected as a result of climate change. Okay, so how that money reaches these countries who are affected by climate change, it's another question. Even if the finance is there, what is the mechanism? Which countries will get this resource? How? I think that is a mechanism to be worked out probably. I hope this will be a judicious mechanism whereby countries like ours can have the opportunity, less bureaucratic and less demanding with strings and what have you, so that we can be able to really get a portion of this resource so that we can put aside for biodiversity conservation and also implementing actions on adaptation and climate change mitigation that can contribute to our NDC target.